How does a peaceful Easter dinner end with my daughter-in-law throwing a wine glass at me because I will not let her parents move into my house? Why did my own son call me selfish and point at the empty bedrooms I paid for with my whole life? I stayed calm that night, but it was the moment I decided to protect my home the only way they still respected, with papers and signatures. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Graham Porter, and I used to believe that a quiet home was the same as a peaceful life. I worked for 40 years as a civil engineer, saved carefully, and paid off my 4-bedroom house with my wife. When she passed, the walls stayed the same, but the sound changed. The house turned into long hallways, closed doors, and one man moving from room to room in a slow routine. I cooked simple meals, kept the garden neat, and told myself that I was lucky to have a safe place. I did not understand that to other people, those empty bedrooms looked less like memories and more like free space they could claim. Easter had always been my wife's favorite holiday. Even after she was gone, I kept some of her habits. I ironed the same tablecloth with the small blue flowers. I placed the same ceramic rabbit in the center of the dining table. That morning, I moved slowly between the kitchen and dining room, arranging plates, checking the ham in the oven, and stirring vegetables. The house smelled like food and old wood polish. I tried to focus on the tasks, not on the empty chair where my wife used to sit. I had invited my son Ryan, his wife Kayla, and Kayla's parents, Harold and Denise. I told myself that it would be nice to have the house full again, even for a few hours. The doorbell rang a little after noon. When I opened the door, Kayla was standing there with a wide smile and a bottle of wine in her hand. Ryan carried a pie, and behind them stood Harold and Denise with a plastic container and a bag of gifts. There were hugs at the doorstep, quick and polite. Ryan said that the house looked the same as always. Kayla looked past me into the hallway for a long moment, and I saw her eyes move over the high ceiling and framed pictures. She said that the place felt so big for just one person. Her voice sounded light, but there was a note in it that I had heard before, the note that turned my life into something to be reorganized. I led them into the dining room, and Kayla walked slowly behind me, touching the edge of a side table, then the frame of a photo. She commented that the guest rooms must be very quiet these days. She said that it seemed almost sad that such nice rooms stayed closed most of the time. Denise agreed and added that guests would feel very lucky to stay there. Harold laughed and said that if he had a house like this, he would fill it with people. I smiled and said that I liked a calm home. Inside, though, I felt something tighten in my chest. I had heard this kind of talk in small pieces over the past year, and I knew it never stopped at simple comments. We moved into the kitchen for a while as I finished the food. Kayla leaned on the counter, watching me carve the ham. She told me that rents in the city had gone up again. She said her parents' landlord had raised their payment and that the building needed repairs. Denise lifted her shoulders and said that they never knew what surprise would come next. Harold spoke about how hard it was at their age to deal with moving again and again. Ryan added that it was not fair for them to live with that stress when our family had extra space. I listened and nodded slowly, but did not answer. At that moment, it was still a general story, still about the world and not my house. We carried the dishes to the dining room and sat down. The table felt full for the first time in a long while. There was passing of plates, small jokes, and simple talk about work and weather. For a short time, it almost felt like the old days when my wife would nudge my arm and whisper something about how much the kids had grown. Then, as often happens, one sentence changed the air in the room. Kayla put down her fork and said that they had been thinking about a solution. She said that since I had 2 spare bedrooms, it made perfect sense for her parents to move in with me for a while. She added that it would be a win for everyone because they would have safety and I would have company. I felt all eyes turn to me. Ryan looked at me with an expression I did not see often anymore, an expression that mixed expectation and impatience. He said that they had talked about this for weeks and that it was the most practical plan. Harold and Denise sat very still, like people waiting for an offer that they already considered done. I put my knife and fork down and folded my hands. I chose my words carefully. I said that I understood their situation and I cared about their comfort, but I was not willing to have anyone move into my home. I said that I liked my privacy and that I was not ready to share my space in that way. My voice stayed calm, but I could feel the floor of the conversation change. For a moment, there was silence. Then Kayla laughed once, but it had no warmth in it. She said that she was surprised by my answer because she thought I would be happy to have family nearby. She said that the empty rooms were a waste and that my wife would not like to see the house so quiet. Ryan's face hardened. He said that I was being selfish. that I knew how hard things were for Kayla's parents and was still choosing to hold on to empty rooms instead of helping real people. He reminded me of all the times he and Kayla had invited me to their apartment for dinner, as if those visits were some kind of currency that should now be paid back with housing. I felt my jaw tense, but I kept my voice steady. I repeated that I would always try to support them in other ways, but that living here was not an option. I said that my answer was not about them as people, it was about what I needed to feel secure in my own home. Kayla's eyes narrowed. She said that it sounded like I was saying her parents were not good enough. Denise wiped her eyes with a napkin and muttered that they never seemed to be welcome anywhere. Harold shook his head and said that older people like me should understand how hard it is to feel pushed aside. The words pressed on me from all sides, each one heavy with guilt and expectation. Ryan leaned forward. He said that the house would be his one day anyway, and that he did not understand why I was holding on to it so tightly now. He suggested that I was lonely and scared of change, and he said that letting Kayla's parents move in would bring life back into the place. Kayla nodded and added that they could help with cleaning and shopping, as if it was already decided. In their minds, my long years of work and saving had turned into a community project that they could rearrange as they liked. No one at the table spoke about the fact that I had paid every bill, fixed every broken pipe, and sat awake many nights to keep this roof over our heads. I felt a slow, cold calm move through me. I looked at Ryan and Kayla and said that I was not changing my answer. I reminded them that this was my home and that I had the right to decide who lived under my roof. I said that I would not discuss it again at the table. My tone was mild, but the final line was clear. It was the kind of boundary I rarely set with them. For a second, I thought the message might sink in. Then I saw anger flash across Kayla's face, quick and sharp, like a match being struck. She grabbed her wine glass from the table. For a heartbeat, I thought she was just going to take a drink. Instead, her hand moved in a fast, hard motion. The glass left her fingers and flew across the space between us. It hit the wall just behind my shoulder and shattered. Red wine splashed against the light paint and ran down in thin lines. Pieces of glass scattered across the floor near my chair. The room stopped. The sound of the glass breaking seemed to hang in the air long after the last piece settled. No one spoke. Denise's mouth was open. Harold stared at the wall. Ryan looked from the stain behind me to my face. I could feel the tiny, sharp points of glass around my shoes, and I sat very still, afraid to move my feet. My ears rang a little from the sudden noise. Kayla's chest rose and fell quickly. She looked like she had surprised even herself. Ryan finally broke the silence. He said that I was tearing the family apart, and that if anything went wrong for them now, I would be the one to blame. His voice shook, but it was not from regret. It was from anger that his plan was not working. I stood up slowly, making sure I did not step on any fragments. I told everyone that dinner was over. I said it in a flat voice with no drama. I went to the kitchen and came back with a broom and dustpan. While they sat in tight silence, I began to sweep the glass into a small pile. I focused on the simple movement of the broom, the soft scrape against the floor, the soft clink of glass pieces against the plastic pan. My hands did not tremble. I had spent my life solving problems in quiet ways, and my body still remembered how to stay steady. As I worked, I heard chairs move back. Denise muttered that they should go. Harold said that it was clear they were not wanted. Ryan told me that he would talk to me later, and that I should think carefully about what kind of father I wanted to be. Kayla did not say anything. She walked past me toward the front door, her shoes loud on the floor, her shoulders stiff. I did not reach out to stop anyone. I did not raise my voice, and I did not ask them to stay. I just kept sweeping. When the door finally closed behind them, the house went quiet again. The red stain on the wall stood out against the pale paint, a sharp mark where the smooth surface had once been clean. I carried the dustpan to the trash and emptied it, listening to the sound of the scattered pieces dropping into the bin. The holiday table still sat full in the next room, with food cooling and napkins folded neatly beside untouched plates. I leaned against the counter and took a long breath. Something important had broken in that room, and it was not only a wine glass. That night, I did not sleep much. After they left, I washed the dishes in slow motion. I scraped plates, rinsed pans, and wrapped the leftovers I knew I would not finish alone. The red mark on the wall stayed in the corner of my vision. I told myself I would repaint it later, but I did not move to clean it. It felt like a sign of something that had been there for a long time, just not visible before. When I finally sat down in my chair in the living room, my phone was still on the table. The family group chat had a new name that I had not noticed before. Ryan had changed it earlier in the week. It now carried a title about future plans for the house. At the time, I had thought it was just his way of being playful. Now, as I scrolled up, I saw it in a different light. The messages from that afternoon were at the top. Ryan had written that we needed to talk sense into me. Kayla had added that I was not being realistic and that they would not let this chance pass by. I went back further in the chat history. Weeks earlier, Ryan had sent a photo of my house from the street and wrote that it was strange to see so many windows dark most evenings. Kayla had replied that it would look much nicer with more lights on and more cars in the driveway. At the time, I had answered with a simple smiley face, trying to be polite. Now those small messages felt like early steps toward the scene with the glass on the wall. I put the phone down and leaned back. In the quiet of the living room, I let my mind travel backward. I thought about Ryan as a child, when we lived in a smaller house and my wife and I talked about a better future. I remembered long evenings at the kitchen table, measuring our budget and looking at loan papers. I took overtime work so he could have a room of his own, a newer bike, school trips. When he reached college age, I emptied a savings account I had planned for my retirement so he would not start his adult life with too many loans. Later, when he met Kayla, my wife and I both thought she was bright and friendly. She was full of energy and always had ideas about events and decorations. At our first dinner together, she complimented our house again and again, saying that it felt cozy and solid. After they got engaged, my wife took me aside one evening and said that we should help them start strong. We agreed to pay a large part of their wedding costs. I told myself this was what parents did, that we were simply passing on what we had. When Kayla and Ryan moved into their first apartment, they invited us over often. The place was small, with thin walls and a balcony that faced a busy street. Kayla used to wave one arm around the living room and say that one day she wanted a place like ours, with a yard and a proper dining room. She would then smile at me and say that we already had the perfect house in the family. I thought it was just a light remark and smiled back. Ryan would laugh and say that maybe we should swap, and my wife and I could take their small flat while they took our larger house. At the time, I took it as a joke. When my wife became sick, things changed. Ryan visited often at first, bringing flowers and helping with errands. Kayla came too, but always moved around the house as if it were a project. She would talk about repainting, changing furniture, opening up spaces. My wife would sit in her chair and listen, her face soft but tired. One evening after they left, she told me that Kayla seemed to think of our home as a future task, not as the result of our life together. I said that she was young and liked to plan. My wife did not argue. She just patted my hand and looked around the room as if she was saying goodbye already. After my wife passed away, the house fell quiet in a way that went beyond sound. I put off changing anything. Her favorite mug stayed in its place in the kitchen cabinet. Her scarf hung on the hook by the door. Ryan told me that I should not live alone in such a big space. He started to suggest that I could move into a smaller apartment, and he and Kayla could take care of the house. He said it would be more efficient. I heard the idea, but I said that I was not ready to leave. He seemed surprised, as if he had already counted on a different answer. The first time Kayla's parents stayed with me was after a storm. Their building had some damage, and they needed a place for a few nights. I told them they could use the guest room. I did not mind that. It felt good to help in a clear, short-term way. A few nights turned into a week. A week turned into 2. Harold set up his laptop in my dining room and began to use it as an office. Denise rearranged the kitchen shelves without asking, saying that her system was more practical. Every morning, I found new items on the bathroom counter. It was as if the house was slowly shifting around me. When the repairs at their place were done, they did not seem eager to leave. Only after I hinted that I needed some quiet time alone did they start to pack. Even then, they left boxes in my garage, saying that it was only temporary. Ryan thanked me and said that this was proof that we all lived as one big family and should share resources more often. At that time, I still believed that the balance would return once the crisis ended. Instead, it set a pattern. Every new difficulty they faced seemed to come with a suggestion that my house could solve it. In the months before Easter, the hints became more direct. During one visit, Kayla walked down the hallway, opened the doors to the guest rooms, and stood in each doorway for a long time. She commented on how the furniture was good quality but rarely used. She said it was almost like a small hotel that never had guests. She added that this was a shame when so many people struggled to find decent living space. When I replied that I sometimes had Laura or other relatives stay over, she only smiled and said that this did not seem to happen often. Ryan used similar language. He spoke about how difficult it was to watch his in-laws struggle. He said they felt like they had no place to belong. Then he would look around my living room and say that we, at least, had one solid base in the family. He described our house as everyone's anchor, a word that sounded kind but held another meaning. When I suggested I could help them look for a cheaper place or see if any church members had a room for rent, he brushed it aside. He said that moving into my home was just simpler. I did not push back as clearly as I should have. I thought that if I stayed polite but firm in small ways, they would understand. I answered messages in a soft tone. I changed the subject when things became too pointed. I tried to remind them of other options. Instead, my mildness only confirmed their belief that with enough time and pressure, I would agree. They did not see my calm as a boundary. They saw it as hesitation. The morning after Easter, I woke up too early. Light entered through the gap in the curtains. I went to the dining room and stood in front of the wine stain on the wall. The mark had darkened overnight. The sight of it made my stomach feel tight. I made coffee and sat at the table with the mug in my hands. My phone lay beside the cup, screen dark. When I turned it on, there were several new messages in the group chat. Ryan had written late at night. His words were long and full of mixed emotion. He said that my refusal had hurt Kayla and her parents. He repeated that I was acting selfish and that I did not understand how hard life was for them. Kayla had sent a shorter message. She said that she could not believe I would rather leave rooms empty than help her parents. She wrote that the scene at the table was not her fault because she was tired of feeling like she had to beg for basic kindness. There was no apology for the glass, no mention of the sound it had made when it broke near my head. Harold and Denise had also joined in. They wrote that they felt unwelcome and that they did not know why I saw them as a burden instead of family. Each message pushed the same idea from a different angle. I felt my chest grow heavy as I read. I set the phone down and pressed my fingers against my eyes. In that moment, I understood something I had not allowed myself to see before. This was not a single argument. It was the result of years of small steps in one direction. While I was busy trying to keep peace and avoid open conflict, the people around me had begun to treat my life's work as a shared resource that they could plan with, whether I liked it or not. Instead of answering right away, I sent a short message to my daughter Laura. I asked if she had time to meet for lunch that day. She replied quickly and suggested a small family-style restaurant near her school. When I arrived, she was already sitting at a corner table with 2 glasses of water and a menu folded in her hands. She looked tired from the week, but her eyes were clear and direct. I told her the story from beginning to end. I described the comments about the house, the talk about the empty rooms, and the way Ryan had said the place would be his one day anyway. I told her about the glass, the wine on the wall, the silence afterward. As I spoke, I watched her face. She listened without interrupting, her jaw setting a little tighter with each new piece. When I mentioned the messages in the chat that morning, she sighed and rested her elbows on the table. Laura said that she had seen parts of this pattern already. She reminded me of times she had heard Kayla talk about when we have the house, as if it were part of their long-term plan. She admitted that she had tried to ignore it because she did not want to cause a split in the family. Now, after hearing about Easter, she said that it was clear to her that they were not just asking for help, they were treating my future as theirs to organize. She told me that she understood why I avoided conflict, but she also said that people like Ryan and Kayla did not respond to gentle hints. She said that they saw my kindness as weakness and that they would push as far as they could. She looked me in the eye and told me that if I wanted peace in my own home, I would need to set firm limits, not only with words, but with something they could not argue with. She did not tell me what to do. She only placed her hand over mine and held it there for a moment. On the drive back home, her words stayed with me. I realized that my idea of family support had turned into something else in their minds. For them, my house was no longer a gift I might share. It was a piece of property they had already counted as part of their lives. As I pulled into my driveway and saw the familiar front of my home, I felt a new kind of resolve settle inside me. I did not yet know the steps I would take, but I knew I could not continue as before. The rooms in that house were not just empty space. They were the result of my entire working life. If I did not protect them, no one else would. The next Sunday, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. I almost stayed home, but habit carried me to church. My wife and I had attended the same small church for years. Even after she passed away, I kept going. It was one place where the routine felt steady, where people greeted me with calm voices and gentle pats on the shoulder. I wanted that quiet more than ever. The service itself passed in a blur. I sat in the same pew we had always used, near the back, hands folded. The hymns rose and fell like a soft tide. I tried to focus on the words, but my mind drifted. I kept seeing the wine stain on my wall, the way it had run down like a red trail. When the final prayer ended, I stayed seated for a moment, letting the row in front of me file out first. The church hall next door held the usual after-service mix of coffee, cookies, and small talk. I almost walked straight past it toward the parking lot, but someone called my name. When I turned, I saw Kayla by the table with the coffee urns. Ryan stood beside her, talking with one of the elders. A moment later, I recognized Harold and Denise at another table, chatting with some regulars. I understood then that Kayla had chosen this place on purpose. She knew the crowd and the social setting. Here, word spread faster than anywhere else. I moved toward the refreshments, not wanting to cause a scene by turning around. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, I heard Kayla's voice carry over the low hum of the room. She sounded bright and friendly, the way she always did in public. She told one of the church ladies that her parents were having a hard time with housing, but that they were lucky because her father-in-law had extra rooms and was going to help. The woman asked what that meant, and Kayla replied that her parents would soon move into the spare rooms at my house. She said that they would finally have a safe place and that it was almost settled. The words landed hard. I stood with my back half turned, coffee in hand, listening. Kayla did not see me. She talked as if the decision had already been made, as if the argument at Easter had never happened. She said that they were ironing out small details, but that this was the best solution, because my big house should not stand half empty. She added that this was what family did for each other. A moment later, Harold joined the conversation. He spoke a little louder, maybe to make sure others heard him. He said that older people like him and me needed to stick together and use their space more wisely. He told the group that it was wasteful for one person to live alone in a big house when others in the family struggled. He lifted his cup and joked that he would be moving into his new wing soon. The people around him laughed politely, not knowing the full truth. I did not walk over to correct them. Instead, I placed my cup down, nodded at a passing couple, and stepped outside. The air felt cool and sharp on my face. I stood there for a moment, watching small groups come out of the hall, chatting and walking to their cars. The scene looked normal from the outside. Inside, I knew that a line had been crossed. They were no longer talking about a plan, they were talking about a done deal. Ryan came out a few minutes later and spotted me. He walked over and said that he hoped I had heard the good news that things were moving forward. He said that Kayla was relieved, and her parents finally felt like they had some stability. I told him that I had not agreed to anything. I reminded him that my answer at Easter had been clear. His smile faded a little, but he told me that I would come around, that I just needed time. He said that everyone at church thought it was a wonderful, generous thing, and that I would not want to disappoint them. Then he patted me on the shoulder and went back inside. On the drive home, the road seemed shorter than usual. My mind moved faster than the car. I replayed the words I had heard in the hall and outside. It was not just private pressure anymore. They were shaping a story in public, drawing others to their side before I even had a chance to speak. They were using community approval as another tool, another weight to put on the scale against my quiet wishes. Later that week, they came to the house again. I knew they were coming. Ryan had sent a message saying that they wanted to discuss some practical steps. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to see Ryan holding a roll of tape and Kayla carrying a notebook. Harold and Denise stood behind them. Denise carried a small cloth bag, and I could see the edge of a measuring tape peeking out. As they stepped inside, Kayla looked down the hallway, her gaze going straight to the guest rooms. She said that they wanted to get a better idea of space so they could bring the right furniture. I responded that there would be no furniture because there would be no move. It was like talking to a television set. No one reacted to my statement. Ryan said that they did not want to waste time and that planning now would save trouble later. They walked down the hall as if they already lived there. Kayla stretched the tape measure from one wall to another, calling out numbers to Denise, who wrote them in the notebook. Harold checked the closets, commenting that they were a good size. Ryan opened the blinds in one of the rooms and said that his in-laws would get nice light in the morning. I followed them, feeling like a guest in my own home. Every now and then, I reminded them that I had not agreed. Each time, my words seemed to slip past them without landing. In the second guest room, Ryan finally turned to face me. He said that they had informed Harold and Denise's landlord that they would not renew the lease. He said that the timing worked out well and that they needed to know when they could bring the bulk of the furniture. I stared at him. I told him that he had made that choice without my consent and that he could not plan their move based on a house that did not belong to him. I said that I would always help where I could, but that I would not accept them as permanent residents here. Ryan's tone changed, losing the smooth layer he used with clients. He said that I was making things difficult for no reason. He said that I would not even be living in this house forever, and that he was only trying to arrange the future in a way that made sense. He pointed out that one day the property would be his, and he asked why I was acting like it was only mine. He said this in front of Kayla and her parents, as if the outcome was obvious to everyone except me. I felt something shift inside me at those words. For years, I had seen myself as a caretaker of the house for the next generation. I had always assumed that my children would inherit it. Hearing Ryan speak like that, in that tone, turned the idea cold. It was not gratitude I heard. It was entitlement. He was not asking me to share. He was telling me that I was standing in the way of something he already counted as his own. I answered in a quiet voice. I said that the house was mine, now, and in any legal document. I said that while I was alive, it was not his to promise to anyone, not even his wife's parents. I reminded him that this roof had stayed over our heads because I worked, saved, and said no to many things so that we could afford it. I told him that if he wanted a house, he was old enough to work toward one himself. The room went still. Kayla's mouth tightened. Denise shook her head and said that she had never felt so unwanted. Harold muttered that people forgot where they came from once they had comfort. Ryan, red-faced, told me that I was acting like a stranger, not a father. He led them out, saying that they would figure something out without my help. For the first time, I let him leave without trying to soften the ending, without calling after him. When the door closed, I walked to my home office. It was a small room at the back of the house, lined with shelves and a simple desk. On the top shelf sat a stack of old folders, some dating back many years. I pulled down the thick one with my name on the tab. Inside were copies of mortgage papers, now marked as paid in full, and the deed that showed the house in my name alone. Behind them lay my will, drawn up when my wife was still alive. At that time, we had split everything evenly between our children, trusting that they would treat each other with care. I sat at the desk and spread the documents out. My eyes moved over the lines of text that once felt so distant and formal. Now they seemed personal and urgent. I traced the line where my name stood next to the word owner. I read the old clauses about how the property would pass if both my wife and I were gone. I realized that the paper still reflected a world that no longer existed, a world where my children saw my efforts as a gift, not a resource to divide before I was even finished using it. As I sat there, a soft knock came at the back door. It was Mr. Benson, my next-door neighbor. He stood on his porch in his usual brown sweater, hands in his pockets. I stepped outside, and we both leaned on the railing, looking out at the fences and small gardens that lined our yards. After a minute of small talk about the weather and the church service, he cleared his throat. He told me that on Easter, he had been in his yard when he heard raised voices coming from my dining room window, which had been slightly open. He said that he did not want to intrude, but he had heard enough to know that things were not peaceful. He heard someone accuse me of not caring about family. Then he heard a sharp crash, like glass breaking against a wall. He saw pieces scatter near the window and saw me stand up slowly. He said that the scene had worried him. I listened and nodded. He went on to say that he had also heard Kayla's voice the other day, when she was on the phone in their driveway. She had told someone that her parents would be moving into my place soon, whether I liked it or not, and that she knew how to make it happen. He said that he did not know what he could do, but that if I ever needed someone to confirm what he had seen and heard, he would be ready to write it down or speak up. His offer sat in the air between us. I felt a mix of shame and relief. Part of me had hoped that the Easter scene had stayed within my walls. Another part was grateful that someone else had witnessed it, that it was not just a story in my own head. I thanked him quietly and told him that his support meant a lot. He patted my arm and went back to his house. After he left, I returned to my office. The folder lay open on the desk, papers spread out. I looked from the deed to my phone on the table. In the past, I would have waited, hoping the situation would cool down on its own. This time, I picked up the phone and searched for a number printed on an old business card tucked into the folder. It belonged to an estate lawyer I had met years before, a former neighbor who had moved her practice across town. I dialed the number and listened to the ringing. A receptionist answered and asked how she could help. I said that I wanted to set up an appointment to review my house and my will. She offered a date and time later in the week. I wrote it down on my paper calendar and circled it with a red pen. When I hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked at the red circle. For the first time in a long while, I felt less like a man being pushed around a board and more like someone placing his own piece on the table. The day of the appointment with the lawyer came faster than I expected. All week, my eyes kept going back to the red circle on the calendar in the kitchen. It sat there between grocery reminders and a dentist note, quiet but important. Every time I walked past it, I felt a small wave of tension, followed by something new, something close to resolve. That morning, I put on a clean shirt and simple jacket. Before leaving the house, I went into my home office and took the folder with the deed and the old will. I added a few recent envelopes with my name and address, then slipped everything into a plain briefcase I had not used since I retired. The weight of it in my hand felt strange but right, like picking up a tool I had almost forgotten how to use. The law office where Nora Patel worked sat in a low building across town between a pharmacy and a small bakery. The waiting area was quiet, with soft chairs and a row of magazines neatly stacked on a table. The receptionist smiled and asked my name, then told me to have a seat. I watched people come and go through the glass door, each holding folders, envelopes, or nothing at all. Some looked worried. Some looked relieved. When Nora came out to greet me, she looked almost the same as I remembered from years before. Calm eyes, dark hair pulled back, neat blazer. We shook hands, and she led me into her office. The room was lined with shelves of thick books and file boxes. A wide desk stood near the window, with only a few neat stacks of paper on top. She offered me a seat and waited until I settled before asking what brought me in. I did not rush. I started with the simple facts: my age, my house, my children. I told her that my wife had passed a few years back. Then I described Easter. I kept my voice even as I told her about the comments, the pressure, and the wine glass against the wall. I saw her eyes sharpen at certain points, but she did not interrupt. When I finished, I added that Ryan and Kayla were already speaking in public, as if the move-in was guaranteed, and that her parents had told their landlord they would not renew the lease. Nora folded her hands on the desk. She asked a few questions in a measured tone. Were Ryan and Kayla listed on the deed? Had I ever signed anything giving anyone rights to live in the house? Had I taken rent from Harold and Denise during their longer stay before? I answered no, no, and no. The house was in my name. No additional agreements. I had allowed short visits in good faith, nothing more. She nodded slowly and said that from what she could see so far, I had full control over the house. She explained that as long as I was mentally sound and not under pressure when signing, I had every right to decide who lived there or did not. She said that no one could force me to accept long-term residence, not even family, unless I had already given them that right on paper. Then she added something that stayed with me. She said that my problem was not only the legal facts, it was the story others were building. In the minds of Ryan, Kayla, and her parents, they were already halfway moved in. In the minds of people at church, perhaps, I was the generous father preparing to open his doors. If I suddenly pushed back without structure, I would seem like the one changing the plan, even though I had never agreed in the first place. She suggested that we bring the legal facts in line with my reality and make that reality harder to twist. She told me we could review my will, my house papers, and any written messages that showed a pattern of pressure or disrespect. She did not promise revenge. She promised clarity and protection. The words were simple, but I felt something loosen inside my chest when I heard them. Nora asked if I had messages from Ryan and Kayla about the house. I said yes. She suggested I collect them. Screenshots of group chats, texts that called my house our future place, any emails that treated my property as shared. She said that such records could be useful, not only to show the pattern now, but also to explain future choices if anyone questioned them later. She also advised me to note any witness who had seen or heard important parts of the situation. I thought of Mr. Benson standing on his porch, telling me he had heard the crash of glass and sharp voices. I mentioned him. Nora's pen paused above her notepad. She said a written statement from him could be helpful. It did not need to be fancy, just clear, date, what he saw and heard, his signature. I told her he had already offered to do that. She nodded, as if that fit into a structure she was already building in her mind. We set a follow-up appointment for a few weeks later. She said that by then I should bring organized copies of any messages and any statements I could gather, along with my existing documents. She explained that we would then look at options for setting things up in a way that matched my wishes. I did not ask for details. I wanted to move, step by step. When I left her office, the sun felt a little brighter. I carried the briefcase back to my car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The situation had not changed yet, but now I was not just reacting. I had begun to act. The next day, I went to the bank. The branch manager recognized me from years of steady visits. He led me to a small meeting room with a glass wall and a simple table. I placed my folder on the surface and told him I wanted to confirm all records related to my house. He pulled up my file on the computer and walked me through it. The mortgage was paid off. The property tax bills were current. Every line showed my name as the sole owner. He asked why I was checking all this, and I told him, in general terms, that there was some confusion in the family and I wanted to be very sure of my position. He nodded, as if he had heard similar stories before. He told me that if I ever wanted to protect the house in a more formal way for the future, there were tools he could explain, different kinds of accounts, ways to place the property into a structure so that it would follow rules I set in advance. He printed a few simple brochures and slid them across the table. I placed them into my folder, their edges crisp and clean. Back home, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I opened the family group chat and began to scroll. Every message that spoke about our future house, every joke about when we take over your place, every line that turned my home into their plan, I took a screenshot. I saved each file with the date in the name. It felt strange, almost cold, to collect my own son's words as evidence, but I reminded myself that I was not doing this to hurt him. I was doing it to show the truth if needed. I moved on to private messages. Ryan had sent me several texts over the past months, pushing the idea of moving Kayla's parents into my house. In many of them, he framed it as a moral test. In some, he spoke as if the decision had already been made. I took pictures of each screen, saved them in a folder on my computer labeled with a neutral name. I did the same with Kayla's messages, including one long email she had sent after an earlier conversation where she laid out a plan for how her parents' furniture would fit perfectly in our spare rooms. When I was done, I plugged in a small USB drive from my desk drawer. I created folders on it and copied all the images and important documents from my computer. Then I made a second copy on an external hard drive I kept in the office. It was the same habit I had used at work for years. Always keep backups. It felt almost comforting to apply that old rule to my personal life. Later that afternoon, I walked over to Mr. Benson's house and knocked. He answered with a small smile and invited me onto his porch. I told him that I had spoken with a lawyer and that his offer to write down what he had seen and heard might be helpful. He nodded, went inside, and came back with a pad of paper and a pen. He sat at a small table and began to write. He noted the date of Easter, the time of day, where he was standing, and what he could see through my dining room window. He wrote that he heard voices raised at me, and that one voice accused me of not caring about family. He described hearing a sharp crash, seeing glass hit the wall, and watching me stand up slowly while the others stayed seated. Then he mentioned the phone call in his driveway when he heard Kayla say that her parents would move into my house whether I liked it or not. When he finished, he signed his name and dated the page. He handed me the paper, and I thanked him. The sheet felt light, but I understood its weight. It was not about hurting anyone. It was about not being alone with my version of events. I told him I appreciated his honesty. He said that he had known me a long time and that he trusted me to do what was fair. Then he looked at me and added that sometimes being fair started with being fair to yourself. His words were simple, but they stayed with me the rest of the day. That evening, while I cooked a small dinner, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a short message from Ryan. He wanted to bring some of Harold and Denise's boxes over this weekend to store in my garage until the move. He wrote as if everything was on schedule. For a moment, I felt the old urge to avoid conflict and agree, just to keep things smooth. Then I looked at the folders on my desk, at the paper with Mr. Benson's neat handwriting, at the brochures from the bank. I wrote back that they could store a few boxes for a limited time, no more than a set number of weeks, and that it would be storage only. I said clearly that this did not mean permission for anyone to live in the house. He replied quickly with a thumbs up and a message saying that I was finally being reasonable. I let the words sit on the screen and did not answer. When they brought the boxes a few days later, I had a simple paper ready on the small table in the garage. At the top, I had written that the items were parked in my garage as temporary storage, listed the date, noted that there was no rent and no right to live in the house attached to this favor. I added a line about when the boxes needed to be removed. Harold skimmed the page, seemed bored, and signed at the bottom without much thought. I placed the signed paper into an envelope and wrote the date on it. Then I carried it into my home office and slipped it into the thick folder with the other documents. As I slid the drawer closed, I felt an odd calm. The situation was still tense. The people around me still saw my house as part of their future. But for the first time, I felt that I was no longer just standing still while they moved around me. Quietly, in my own way, I had begun to build my side of the story, in ink and paper that did not shake. The weeks after I had Harold sign the storage paper moved in a slow, steady line. From the outside, nothing dramatic happened. There were no raised voices in my house, no broken glass, no sudden scenes. On the inside, though, something kept shifting. Every day, I checked the envelope drawer in my home office at least once, just to see the neat row of papers, the deed, the old will, the neighbor's note, the storage agreement. Seeing them there made me feel less alone. Nora and I had set a follow-up appointment. On the morning of that day, I woke early and went through the house as if I were seeing it for the first time. I walked down the hallway, opened each bedroom door, and stood in the doorway for a few seconds. The guest rooms looked the same. Clean, quiet, beds made, curtains half open to let in soft light. I thought of how many times I had heard other people speak about these rooms as if they already belonged to them. That thought no longer made me only tired. Now it made me firm. In the kitchen, I placed my briefcase on the table. I opened it and checked everything inside. Copies of the deed, the old will, printed screenshots of messages, the neighbor's written statement, the storage paper with Harold's signature, all exactly where I had left them. In the side pocket, a small USB drive with digital copies. I closed the case and listened to the click of the locks. It sounded like the start of something. At Nora's office, the receptionist greeted me by name and showed me in almost at once. Nora sat behind her desk, glasses on, reading a file. She looked up and gave me a nod that felt less like a polite greeting and more like a sign that we were already in the middle of a shared task. I set the briefcase down and took out the documents, lining them up in front of her. She went through each piece carefully, her pen moving now and then to underline a phrase or mark a margin. She asked small questions: when a message was sent, who was copied on a thread, whether anyone else had seen a particular conversation. I answered as clearly as I could. When she read Mr. Benson's note, her mouth pressed into a straight line. She said that it was simple but strong. It showed that I had not imagined the Easter scene and that others were aware of the pressure around me. Then she closed the folder and looked directly at me. She said that I was in a strong position. The house was mine alone. I had proof that I had not promised space to anyone. I had a witness to the earlier conflict and written proof of ongoing pressure. She said that the next step was to make sure my formal plans matched how I wanted the future to look. Once that was done, she explained, it would be much harder for anyone to push me or twist my choices. We talked about my will. The old document split everything evenly between Ryan and Laura. I had assumed for years that this was fair. Now, after seeing how Ryan treated the house and my work, the word fair felt different. Nora did not tell me what to do. She laid out options. I could keep things as they were. I could adjust parts. I could put the house into a structure that gave me control now and shaped what would happen later. She spoke in clear, steady sentences, never rushing. I took a breath and told her that I wanted two things. First, I wanted complete security in my home for as long as I lived. No one moving in without my written consent. No one using my space as a bargaining chip. Second, I wanted the house to go to someone who had shown respect, not entitlement. I told her quietly that this meant I no longer felt comfortable leaving it to Ryan. Saying that out loud hurt more than I expected. Nora nodded and wrote notes without judgment. She suggested placing the house into a trust that recognized my full control for my lifetime and then directed where the property would go after I was gone. In that structure, she said, we could write in any conditions and explanations that made sense. We could also adjust Ryan's part of other assets if I wished, giving more to Laura or to a cause my wife had cared about. The details were for the documents. For now, she wanted me to be clear on my choices. I left her office a little later with a stack of papers to sign at a notary once she had prepared them. She promised to send me the drafts first so I could read them at home. As I walked back to my car, the late afternoon light fell across the pavement in long strips. The steps from the door to the parking spot felt different from the steps going in. Earlier, I had walked in with problems. Now I walked out with a plan forming, one line at a time. A few days later, I sat at a simple wooden table in a small notary office above a row of shops. The room smelled faintly of toner and coffee. The notary, a quiet woman with silver hair, checked my identification, then slid each document toward me, one after another. Declarations, trust papers, an updated will, written instructions about residence and access. I read enough to recognize the terms Nora and I had discussed. At the bottom of each page, there was a space for my signature and the date. My hand felt steady as I signed. I did not rush, but I did not hesitate either. The scratch of the pen on paper was the only sound in the room. At the end, the notary added her own marks, stamps, and seals. She gave a small nod as she gathered the stack and placed it in a folder. It was a simple action, but I knew that from that moment on, my house was no longer just a place I occupied. It was a place protected by clear rules that did not depend on anyone's mood. When I left the building, I walked past the bakery downstairs. Through the window, I saw rows of bread and a young worker wiping down the counter. For some reason, the normal, small scene calmed me. Not everything in life was a struggle. Some things were just ordinary tasks done well. I took that feeling with me as I drove home. Life did not pause while these legal steps moved forward. Ryan and Kayla continued with their plans, as if nothing had changed. More boxes appeared in my garage. Each time they brought some, I noted the date and number in a small notebook I kept on the workbench. Harold joked about the move as he stacked them, even though I had repeated that this was storage only. Kayla walked through the garage once, stopping to comment on how much space there still was and how useful it would be once they were fully settled. On Sundays, I still went to church. I sat in my usual place, nodded to familiar faces, and tried to keep my mind quiet. One morning, after the service, I walked out into the parking lot and saw Ryan and Laura standing near her car. Their posture told me they were not having a light chat. Ryan's hands moved in quick, sharp gestures. Laura stood still, arms folded. I walked closer, not to eavesdrop, but because my own car was nearby. As I approached, I caught enough of their words to understand. Ryan was telling her that she should support the plan because it was best for everyone. He said that Dad would be safer with more people in the house and that this setup would free up money for other things. Laura answered in a calm, firm tone. She said that forcing someone into a crowded living situation against his will was not care. It was taking advantage. Ryan noticed me then and fell silent. Laura gave me a small nod, then said she had to leave for lesson planning. She hugged me briefly and got into her car. As she drove away, Ryan turned to me. His face was tight. He said that he did not understand why Laura was making this harder. He said that she was acting like an outsider, not like someone who understood what was best for the family. I did not answer that part. Instead, I told him that I had spoken with a lawyer about my house and my plans. His eyes widened for a moment, then narrowed. He asked what that meant. I said that it meant I was making sure my affairs were in order and that no one would be confused about who controlled the property now or later. I spoke in a level voice, not aiming to provoke, only to state a fact. He said that talking to lawyers was extreme and that we could have worked this out like adults. I thought about Easter, about glass on the floor and voices raised at me in front of guests, and let his comment pass without reply. I told him that I would be inviting them to a meeting soon to discuss everything in a clear, formal setting. I said that I wanted him, Kayla, and her parents to hear the information at the same time, with someone present who could answer questions. Then I opened my car door and left. Back at home, the days before the meeting filled with small, quiet tasks. Nora's office sent me confirmation of the date and time. The message explained that we would meet in the conference room to go over my estate plan and housing decisions. She had copied Ryan, Kayla, and her parents on the same note. I read it twice, noticing how neutral and professional the wording was. No anger, no blame, just structure. I printed the email and added it to my folder. Then I went through all my papers again, more from habit than need. Deed, trust documents, updated will, neighbor statement, storage agreement, printed copies of messages. I placed them in a clear order, separating each section with a labeled sheet. On the desk, the stack looked more like a work project than a family matter. In a way, that made it easier to handle. The night before the meeting, I slept more soundly than I had in weeks. The house was still and dark. When I woke in the early morning, the sky outside was pale gray. I made coffee, stood in the kitchen, and listened to the quiet. No one else moved in the rooms, no doors opened or closed. For the moment, at least, the space was fully mine. After breakfast, I put on a simple button-down shirt and the same jacket I had worn to my first visit with Nora. I polished my shoes with an old cloth from the closet, not because anyone would notice, but because it made me feel prepared. In the office, I placed the sorted documents and the USB drive into my briefcase. I checked that it closed properly. I picked it up and held it for a second, feeling the solid weight pull against my hand. Before leaving, I walked down the hallway one more time. I paused in front of my wife's old photo on the wall, the one where she stood in the garden smiling at the camera, sunlight on her hair. I did not speak out loud, but in my mind I told her that I was finally doing what I should have done sooner, protecting the home we had built from becoming a prize for those who did not respect it. Then I locked the front door behind me and went out to the car. The drive to Nora's office felt shorter than usual. When I arrived, I parked and sat for a moment, watching people move along the sidewalk. I could see the glass doors of the building ahead and the outline of the conference room windows on the upper floor. I took a slow breath, picked up my briefcase, and stepped out of the car, ready to walk inside and let the next part unfold. When I walked into Nora's office building, the lobby was quiet and cool. The receptionist greeted me and pointed down the hall toward the conference room. I could hear faint voices already, the familiar rhythm of my son's laugh. I stepped through the doorway and saw them all seated at the long table, Ryan and Kayla on one side, Harold and Denise beside them. Laura sat at the far end, her hands folded, eyes steady. Nora stood near the head of the table, a folder open in front of her. Kayla greeted me with a bright, practiced smile. She said she was glad we were finally making things official. Ryan nodded and added that this would clear the way for the move and give everyone peace of mind. He spoke as if the meeting was a formality, a stamp on a decision already made. Harold mentioned that he had told their old landlord they were almost out, and Denise talked about how she was looking forward to her room. No one seemed to notice the way Laura's jaw tightened. Nora waited until I sat down, then took her seat at the head of the table. She introduced herself to those who did not know her and explained why we were there. She said that I had asked her to help review my estate and housing decisions, and that she would walk everyone through what had been done. Her tone was calm and neutral, the same one I had heard in her office. She began with a short summary of my years in the house, how my wife and I had bought it, how I had paid it off, how I had been living alone there since her passing. Then she moved to the recent events, speaking of Easter in simple, clear terms. She mentioned raised voices, a thrown glass, and a neighbor who had heard and seen part of the scene. She slid Mr. Benson's written statement to the center of the table for everyone to read. Ryan shifted in his seat. Kayla frowned and said that the note was taken out of context. Nora did not argue. Instead, she opened another section of the folder and placed printed pages in front of them. Copies of group chat messages, texts, and emails. Lines where the house was called Our Future Place. Jokes about taking over the rooms. Statements about moving in whether he likes it or not. The room grew quieter with each page. Then Nora turned to the main point. She said that, after reviewing everything, I had chosen to place the house into a trust. Under that trust, I held full control of the property for as long as I lived. No one had a right to reside there without my written consent. After my time, the house would pass, not to Ryan by default, but to Laura. She said this in the same calm tone, but the words landed like a weight. Ryan stared at her, then at me. He asked if this was a joke. Kayla demanded to know how I could take his house from him. Nora answered that it was never his house. It was mine, and I had the legal right to decide where it would go. She added that my updated will still gave Ryan a share of other assets, but in a reduced amount and on a later timeline, with a note explaining the reasons. Finally, she brought out the storage paper Harold had signed in my garage. She read the lines about temporary boxes, the removal date, and the fact that no housing rights came with this favor. She said that the boxes would need to be removed by the listed date or storage fees, and other steps would follow. Harold's face went pale as he recognized his own signature at the bottom. Kayla said that this was cruel. Denise said that they had counted on my house. Ryan said that I was choosing one child over another. I let their words pass over me. When they paused, I spoke. I said that I had spent my life building and protecting that home, and that I would no longer let anyone plan my future without my consent. I said that they were free to make their own arrangements, but that my answer about the house would not change. I thanked Nora and Laura, stood up, and closed my briefcase. As I walked to the door, I heard chairs scrape and voices rise again, sharper now, but I did not turn back. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the conference room door shut behind me. Their words fell to a muffled blur, cut off by the thick glass, while the corridor in front of me stayed still and quiet.